I've been on about 4 or 5 different types of sleeping pills and none of them help. That's how bad the nightmares are. I prefer not to sleep, not dream about it, than sleep and just see the picture in my head is pretty bad.
This is the southern Korengal.
Deadliest place on earth, the Korengal Valley.
We're not ready for this.
Get the fuck over here!
You're in no man's land.
Where the road ends, Taliban begins.
Holy shit, did everybody from the entire country come to this valley? Is nobody else fighting anymore? Is every bad guy in my face?
We can make more money, make you guys richer. What I need, though, is I need you to join with the government.
The fear is always there.
We're gonna die here.
Fucking Christ.
Say a prayer and move on.
You can't get a better high. It's like crack, you know? Once you've been shot at, you really can't come down. You can't top that.
How are you going to go back to the civilian world then?
I have no idea.
Hey babe, I miss you. Can't wait to get home.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. That was the trailer for a movie that my partner Tim Hetherington and I shot, directed, and produced. That's been out for the past couple months in the United States. And if you're interested, it may be playing in a city near where you live. That movie was shot in the Korengal Valley of eastern Afghanistan. I spent a year off and on there with Tim, with a small platoon in a small outpost. They were in almost 500 firefights during their deployment. A fifth of all the combat in all of Afghanistan while they were there was taking place in that 6-mile-long valley. I'm a journalist. Specifically, I'm a war journalist. One of the things I cover, I realized as I started thinking about this talk I was going to give, one of the things I cover in my job is catalysts. There are social and political factors that cause wars that can simmer for decades and be ignited literally in an afternoon. One of my jobs, one of the things I do in my job is to explain how that catalyst worked or try to predict when it's going to happen again. It happens all the time. There's a tax on tea, and suddenly the colonies are rebelling against the English government. An airplane is shot down over Rwanda with the president in it, and suddenly there's 3 months of genocide that kill almost a million people. That kind of event that precipitates a long-standing problem is exactly what I cover in my job. It affects me personally. I was in Liberia once during the Civil War in 2003, and the rebels were advancing on the capital, and the Charles Taylor government, wasn't even a government really, were convinced that America was backing the rebels. And I was the only American in the country. I'd come in kind of randomly during a time of peace, and then suddenly the rebels attacked. And Charles Taylor, while I was there, George Bush declared that Charles Taylor was a war criminal and could not travel the world freely and would be brought to The Hague if caught. And that afternoon, my life was in danger. It was the right thing to say by President Bush. It was true. But suddenly, I was accused of being an American spy. And I had to, I was actually kicked out of the country. I was dragged into a basement detention center and interrogated. The U.S. Embassy, which was getting mortared at the time, intervened. And so they kicked me out of the country. I couldn't get out because rebels had surrounded the Capitol. And so I went into hiding. That statement by President Bush was the catalyst for something that almost ended very, very badly for me and remains, for all this footage that you saw there, remains probably the most terrifying experience in my life. The way I understand catalysts is that basically, I mean, as a journalist, I focus on catalysts in the social world, the political world. I'm not a chemist, obviously. Catalysts take basically a sort of sea of potential, and they convert it into energy. You light a match in a kitchen with a gas leak, and that match is the catalyst for an explosion. Someone shouts an accusation during a mob, a lynch mob, a riot. That happened to me once in Liberia. And suddenly a mob turns into a lynch mob, and people get killed. It can be one sentence. Planes fly into buildings. That's a catalyst. In my job, catalysts can produce a lot of good and a lot of bad, and often both. And I think it's very interesting to watch the events following 9/11 still unfolding, watch to sort of see the bad and the good compete with each other. One human reaction to catastrophe is to group together and help one another. Another reaction is to become extremely defensive and paranoid and ready to kill. They both happen. I've seen it in wars over and over and over again. Tremendous examples of courage and generosity, side by side with incredible acts of violence and hatred. Political and religious leaders all act as catalysts for what I think of as the sort of endless human capacity for both violence and for generosity and collective action. Successful political leaders are catalysts. The ones who are not successful fail to become catalysts. That's why they're not successful. I'm going to tell a brief story. I think no discussion on catalysts is complete without a story about a bar fight. When I was a young man, I was traveling in Spain. My dad grew up in Spain and France, and I've been back there many times. And I was in Pamplona during the festival, the running of the bulls. And, basically you're out all night and you go to sleep at about 7 a.m. after they run the bulls, and you wake up in the afternoon. And I mean, at least that's what you do if you're 22. And I wound up with some really nice young Spanish guys, a couple of guys, and one of them, they had quite a lot to drink. And one of them was wearing a plastic Viking helmet, sort of askew on his head. And they were just friendly, and we started talking. We were in a bar. In walked three very tough-looking Moroccan guys and spoke French. My friend spoke Spanish. And one of the Moroccan guys walked up to the guy with the Viking helmet, grabbed it off his head, and said in French, "That's my helmet. You stole it from me." I'm the only person who speaks both languages, so now I'm like a UN translator in the middle of a bar fight. So I'm explaining everything. The Spanish guys grab the Viking helmet. The other two Moroccan guys grab the Viking helmet, and I'm trying to translate and avoid a bar fight. And I'm thinking in my mind, how long? What's the protocol? How long do you have to know a guy before you really are obligated to back him up in a bar fight? Like, I'm hoping years, maybe months. If it's an hour, I'm in trouble, right? So I'm trying to negotiate this. It's getting uglier and uglier. Everyone else backs away. And then suddenly, they haven't started hitting each other yet, but that's coming. They're pulling at the Viking helmet, and they're all cross-eyed drunk, right? They're pulling at it, and the helmet, the thing they're fighting over, starts to rip. The only thing that could have gotten these guys to stop was that they were destroying the thing they were fighting over, right? Of course. So, stop, stop, stop. And one of the Spanish guys yelled, "Stop, para, para, para." And then he came to me and he said, in this sort of elegant Spanish way, "Do you promise, will you take my place at the helmet?" I was like, "Okay." So he said, "Do you promise to defend the helmet upon your ancestors," and blah, blah, blah. And I said, "Yes," etc. And so he went and got the biggest, cheapest jug of red wine that he could from the bartender, screwed the top off, and in that bar at that time, you could just buy big bottles of wine from the bartender. It was no problem. So he came over, and he filled the Viking helmet with red wine up to the brim till our fingertips were red. And then he put his hand underneath it. And I think the only thing that would have been worse for these 5 guys, worse than destroying the helmet, would be spilling red wine, right? So he puts his hand under the helmet, and he says, now everyone let go. And we all let go, and he gave the helmet to the leader of the 3 Moroccan guys and said, you drink first. You're our guests in this country, you drink first. And he drank from the helmet, passed it to his friends, went around the circle, went around again, filled up again with more red wine, finished the bottle, got another bottle of red wine. Half an hour later, the helmet is like forgotten under a table, and they're just passing the bottle of red wine around, and like an hour after that, they're all best friends. They can't understand each other at all, but they're so drunk that it doesn't matter. You can see in that story the hallmarks of human society. You can see tribal affiliation. You can see the defense of resources and territory. You can also see the incredibly deep satisfaction of the human connection. That guy, that helmet, was a catalyst, threatened to be a catalyst for violence. It also became a catalyst for human connection. They're so close, those two things. Human society, we evolved from the higher primates, and we evolved from a system where dominance, they were groups controlled by dominance hierarchies. As language developed, that system of controlling the group broke down. Before language, I mean, just on a very crude level, if you're the biggest ape in the group, and there's no language, so no one else can form an affiliation to confront you, you basically call the shots. And as soon as you have language, you have alliances of weaker individuals who collectively are stronger than any one dominant individual. With that language, you need empathy. You know, Zog wants to sleep with your wife. You go tell Joe that you're unhappy about it, but Zog's 8 feet tall. Joe needs a certain amount of empathy to say, okay, I'll help defend your home because you will do that for me. I'm really making this very simple, but that's the essence of how I understand that this works. So as soon as you have language, you have cooperation, you have empathy, and you have organized violence and organized cooperation. A society that doesn't have organized cooperation, an early human society that doesn't have organized cooperation cannot thrive. And one that cannot assemble organized violence, organized defense, can't survive, can't defend itself. Something like they estimate that something like 15% of our early ancestors died from violence, intergroup violence. 15%. I mean, imagine a 15% casualty rate in this society from violence from another group. I think the civilian casualty rate in the 20th century, which was such a bloodbath, was 1%. Just imagine. That was human prehistory. So you got violence, and you have cooperation and empathy. Every social catalyst, I believe that every social catalyst will potentially, at least of the ones I deal with as a journalist, will potentiate one of those two, or both. I spent, as I said, a year off and on with a platoon of 30 men in a very remote outpost in Afghanistan. The outpost was called Restrepo. This is the name of the movie. They had no running water up there. They couldn't bathe for a month at a time. They had no phone, no internet, no connection to the outside world, no hot food. They basically lived in a world of sandbags and crates of ammunition, 2 or 3 firefights a day for a year. No women, nothing. They were on Mars, except with a lot of combat. Very high casualties. The guys really suffered. And they came back. It was just basically the worst thing that a person can go through. And they came back to their base in Vicenza, Italy. This battle company of the 173rd Airborne, based in Vicenza. And all the a lot of the things that were not at Restrepo were very easily available around the base in Vicenza. And they sort of indulged themselves for a few weeks. And after a few weeks or a couple months, most of them realized that they missed Restrepo. They missed being on that hilltop. They missed the worst experience of their lives. It was it was very confusing to them. And in my book, War, the main thing I try to explain is what is it about combat, because it's so obviously so awful. What is it about combat that young men actually miss? Why is that more compelling than the society that soldiers come home to? I don't mean just in this war, I mean going back to the Iliad. I think one of the explanations is that combat potentiates both of these great human reactions to crisis. It triggers organized violence, and it triggers cooperation and brotherhood, and in a word, love. One of the guys in the platoon said, Brendan O'Byrne, said to me, we were on a hillside, and we were outside an enemy village, and American mortars were sort of going over our head and hitting the far hillside. But there's always, it's very tense, because mortars, sometimes they fall short, and they were going right over our heads. And so we were just sitting there trying to have a conversation, hoping this all ended well. And he said, it's crazy. There's guys in the platoon who straight up hate each other, but we would all die for each other. That is one of the most tremendous human traits. To briefly go back to chimpanzees, chimpanzee groups will send out groups of males, 6, 7, 8 males, into the territory of a rival group. And they will it's a raid, right? And they go in very quietly, and they're very observant, and they're very careful, and they will attack lone males of the rival group and beat them to death. And over the course of months or years, one by one, they will kill off the males of this rival group, and then they will expand their territory. Suddenly they have all the females of that group. They have more food. With more food, the females in their group are more likely to raise healthy young, and that group, that aggressive group, thrives. The less aggressive group dies out, okay? Chimpanzees happen to be genetically our closest. We are the closest primate relative to chimpanzees. So chimpanzees and humans are over here. The rest of the primate groups are over here. But here's what's interesting about this. When this happens and they attack a lone male, and that lone male has brothers in the area who can hear his screams, they do not rush to his aid, even if doing that would equalize the fight and allow their compatriot to escape alive. They just get out of there. The problem is that there's no language to convey acts of courage in chimpanzee society, and there's no language with which to penalize acts of cowardice. And as soon as you have language, and you fail to come to the aid of a brother, and you survive, but back at the campfire, everyone's talking about how disgracefully you acted, all of a sudden, courage is something that's required of individuals, and cowardice is something that is punished. And one of the really extraordinary human accomplishments, I think, is this idea that individuals will risk or sacrifice their lives for other people that they're not even related to. I don't mean their kid, I don't mean their spouse, I mean some guy who joined the platoon 3 months ago. There's no other animal species that does that in that way. The throwing yourself on a hand grenade act. I'm going to bring this to a close. I don't know how long I've talked, but I don't see a flashing red light yet, but I think we're getting close. Some people, I feel, look at human history, look at human events, and they see war, they see conflict. That is what characterizes the human experience. As a journalist, I can tell you that as much as that is true, in equal part, what I see is an incredible sea of potential altruism and generosity and cooperation. It is both. There's a war in Afghanistan. People are getting killed. We spent God knows how much money, $1 trillion, whatever dollars. There are also people from this society who have nothing to do with Afghanistan who have gone over there, civilians, who have gone over there as doctors, as architects, as engineers to help build roads, to help cure people, bring medicine, to educate children. And tragically, many of those people have been killed doing it. That is altruism. That is human altruism, side by side with human violence. And I feel that if we as a species, if our leaders, if we as a people can figure out a catalyst that triggers that altruism that's out there, we'll be fine. Thank you very much.